Hi, I'm going to have a look at the conclusion. This is a conclusion that I wrote for an essay that I was doing under the old HSC course. You can see it is quite lengthy. There are some things in it that I did in it because I did it under time conditions, and there are some things I did in it that are not correct for a conclusion. And there's some things that work really well. So I'm going to take you through what needs to be left out and what works really well. So it starts, to the modern audience, both texts present a dystopian universe that cannot fully be understood. So this particular essay was exploring two texts at once. Both composers have revealed worlds where the social issue of women entering the workforce and breaking away from the family home corrupts society. Yet we live in a world where men and women both work and equality is sought for all. Some will argue that the issue of domesticity that the composers have called their contemporaries Some will argue that the issue of domesticity that the composers have called their contemporaries to critically reflect upon goes against women's right to equality. This sentence here chimes the question and brings us back to the question. However, when both texts are examined together, it must be argued, so you see here I'm using high modality, it must be argued that both composers have successfully presented dystopian universes that reveal the loss of humanity due to the breakdown of domesticity. So other things I'm doing here is, I'm using the successfully presented dystopian universes. So this again here, this is chiming the question. This is evaluative. Excuse me, that reveal the loss of humanity due to the breakdown of domesticity. For Lang, so I'm talking about one of the composers. So for Lang, he still had hope. So I'm talking about one composer here. Yet for Orwell, the other composer, all hope was gone. Now this is where I go wrong and it stops being a conclusion. I introduce new evidence. You don't introduce new evidence in a conclusion. This is encapsulated when Julia tells Winston, "I betrayed you," and Winston replies, "I betrayed you." The repetition of this simple sentence embedded within a text rich in complex sentences carries a power that goes beyond its temporal bounds. Julia has betrayed Winston, the everyman, by leaving the home and entering the world of servitude, work, destroying society. Winston, the everyman, has betrayed Julia, the ancient Roman everywoman, by oppressing her since the antiquities, forcing her to escape that one place that liberty was supposed to exist, the home. The forewarning of both composers failed. So really, when I look at this should have just been another body paragraph. And I should have probably started the conclusion here, perhaps, because this here is an evaluative sentence about the evidence that I've just introduced, and so then this really here would be my conclusion. Women fought for their right to choose to work. Women must now work. They are as enslaved as the men of both texts. Children are raised in education centres, the public institutions of Orwell's universe. Yet the one thing that women wanted, freedom from oppression, has never ceased. Women are still fighting for this right. Now, one of the things that you'll notice is I vary my sentence structure. I have short sentences, I have long sentences. I play around with sentence structure to really lift my writing. However, and it is okay to do a however in a conclusion. You can argue two sides even to wrap it up. However, both texts do reveal that women had to fight against oppression. It was just the method that failed. Unfortunately, as Orwell reveals, then you'll see here I put in evidence, but I'm not analysing the evidence, so that's okay. In a conclusion, it's okay to have evidence if you're not doing analysis of it. I'm just using Orwell's words to reinforce what I'm saying. So I say here, unfortunately, as Orwell reveals, at the time you think there's no way of saving yourself and you're quite ready to save yourself, you don't give a damn what they suffer, all you care about is yourself. Thus, so that's a word of evaluation and it's a big inclusive word. Thus, both texts have failed in ensuring that composers' contemporaries critically reflect on their own society. So that is the question, and I'm saying that the texts have failed to do what the question was asking. So thus, both texts have failed in ensuring that composers' contemporaries critically reflect on their own society, not because the texts themselves have failed, but because the audience was already lost. The audience had already entered a stubborn, self-willed exile from the loving breast. So I've used a quote from the text to end it, to give it finality. So for instance, in what you're doing, you could have, and I've also brought the audience in. This is the lesson that is to be learned. And I'm saying the lesson can't be learned because the audience is already lost to the reader. But in this instance, also like for what you're doing with Yeats, you could have in there one of his lines, slouching towards Bethlehem, or changed utterly, a terrible beauty is born, depending on, of course, on what it is that you're arguing and what you're saying. But you can see when you look at just this part here, the things that make it stand out is it concludes the argument that's been made. Like if you'd read the whole essay, which I will give you next term, but when you read it, it all flows through to this final point, and there is a conclusive argument being made. This is about the oppression of women, and that in these texts, it's too late. The women have already been exiled and put into servitude. That moment to have a choice turned into an obligation to work, kind of thing. But there's things that I have there. I argue against myself. I use high modality. I bring in my own context. I use words like thus, like words that are evaluative and judgmental and conclusive. I bring the audience back into it as well, and I bring in, as I said, I bring in context. And I still chime that question the whole way through as well. And I'm just going to quickly, because it's got a bit of time, you can stop now listening now if you wanted to. Otherwise, if you wanted to go over the introduction again, you can. Up here, this is my introduction here. I've said G.K. Chesterton stated, "The home is the only place of liberty, the one wild place in a world of rules and set tasks." This is what's called a motherhood statement. This is another way of doing an introduction. You could have a motherhood statement from another composer completely, or a critic that responds to the question. And then here, this here is my response to the question that was being asked, and it chimes the question but puts it into my words. So the purpose of dystopian universes is to encourage the responder to critically reflect on the social issues of their time and become catalysts for change. Then I introduce the text. Although both Fritz Lang's 1927 silent film Metropolis and George Orwell's 1949 satirical novel 1984 encourage their responders to critically reflect on several societal and political issues, this is part of the question as well, it will be shown, so I'm saying here, this is what I'm going to be arguing. It will be shown that both these texts, albeit from different contexts, reveal a future dystopian universe that revolves around the breakdown of domesticity in the family home. So I'm saying this is my roadmap. This is what I'm going to talk about in my essay. And the things that I'm going to talk about are these two key ideas here. And then I give a roadmap sentence. To be able to understand how this breakdown can occur is necessary to first examine domesticity within the composer's context. In this particular essay, I then do a paragraph on context, and then I move into my alarm paragraphs. The other tip I will give you is you'll notice when I'm moving in between paragraphs, like if I have a look up here, this last sentence here of this body paragraph, actually, let's go to the top. So you got the introduction. I'm saying we have to know the context. Then here, the turn of the 20th century brought with it suffragette movement and blah, blah, blah. And I move straight into context. Then down here, it ends with, yet even with this political move, there was still a counteracting move that longed for the reinstatement of the 19th century woman. Then I follow that argument again in my next sentence that opens the next paragraph. This division between the real and the ideal sprung, so you can see when I've got this division, I'm echoing what came before. So this division between the real and the ideal sprung from a critical examination of the role of women in society, the role of worker and contributor to a growing economy, or the role of homekeeper and mother, the first educators of our future generations. If I go to the end of that paragraph, down here, whether or not today's audience would accept Lang's perspective, it must be argued that Lang is using the antithetical Maria to forewarn his audience that the emergence of the new woman will ultimately, you'll see I love the word ultimately, will ultimately lead to the loss of domesticity, with the full implication that lust will replace love and an absence of children. Now, if you have a look at this next paragraph, I echo that. It is the absence of children and the removal of love that is a result of the breakdown in domesticity. So that argument keeps flowing the whole way through, and I stay on track with what I'm saying. Then here, at the end of that paragraph, yet it can be argued that this is only, notice little things that I do, like I've got, yet it can be argued, like I argue against myself all the time in my essays, so that I'm showing different perspectives. Yet it can be argued that this is only a fraction of what Orwell foresees for his contemporaries' future, for it will be shown that Orwell is critically examining the breakdown of the family home due to women entering the workforce. Then here, G.K. Chesterton, so I'm referring to my motherhood statement again, wrote that he agreed with all aspects of the feminist movement except for one, the belittlement of domesticity. So here, the belittlement of domesticity echoes the idea of women entering the workforce. So I'm echoing from one paragraph to the next. It can be seen here again. As such, it can be argued that Lang's world is no different to that of Orwell's. The breakdown of domesticity results in the breakdown of the family, evidenced by the neglect of children. Yet, and so now I go into my next body paragraph and I argue against it, yet it becomes evident that the role of women as mother becomes a significant aspect of maintaining strong social values. So I'm bouncing my arguments around from one paragraph to the next. Here. For Lang, he is critically forewarning that for society to have any hope, it cannot have that hope and have the existence of the new woman. Next paragraph. However, society did not heed Lang's warning. And I'm saying that there's a warning here and that society has ignored it. Society did not heed Lang's warning, and a mere 20 years later, women were now legally required to join in that servitude to the machine. Now I go into the Orwell text. And then down here, the mother is lost to society. Ultimately, Orwell's dystopian universe reveals to his contemporaries a total loss of humanity. To the modern audience, both, and then I move into what was my conclusion, but I didn't quite get it right because I added extra evidence, which I wouldn't need to do. But you can see how I keep on track from one paragraph to the next. I keep echoing what came before, so that those arguments stay on track. So I chime the question the whole way through, like what I was showing you in the last two lessons. I keep the argument apparent from one body paragraph to the next body paragraph, and I keep it flowing the whole way through so that I'm continuously on track with answering the question. And I'm really precise with how I'm answering the question in relation to, as we've got up here, what are the key ideas. And in my conclusion, my language shifts and I become more persuasive in my language choices to show the reader that, as far as I'm concerned, they by the time they get to the end of my essay, they should be on board with me and see my argument and agree with it. Anyway, I hope that helps you. Good luck in your exams.